Welcome to Meet the Press Now. I'm Kelly O'Donnell in Washington. We begin with breaking news as the Trump administration grapples with the consequences of its aggressive immigration crackdown and questions about whether it is pushing agents too far, too fast. After a second deadly ICE-involved shooting in less than a week, this time in Maine. Both incidents involving agents attempting to make vehicle stops, both resulting in the deaths of men who were not the initial targets of the enforcement operations. Amid the increasing scrutiny, NBC News has learned that ICE has ordered its officers nationwide to stop vehicle pursuits. That's according to one current and two former DHS officials. This comes as we learn more about yesterday's shooting in Maine, as well as the identity of the man killed. The Embassy of Colombia confirming that Johann Sebastian Duran Guerrero, a 26-year-old Colombian national, was the person shot and killed in Maine. A senior DHS official familiar with the incident tells NBC News he was not the intended target of yesterday's operation, but did match the physical description of that target. Security video showing parts of the encounter. And while the exact moment of the shooting is unclear, you can see the white vehicle occupied by Guerrero driving in a circle as an officer tries to grab the door. In another video, ICE officers are seen pulling an injured man from the vehicle and seeming to secure his hands behind his back. The Department of Homeland Security's Inspector General is now leading an investigation into the shooting. While on Capitol Hill, Maine Independent Senator Angus King is demanding more information.
I just learned 5 minutes ago that ICE has suspended vehicle stops, which to me is an admission that this activity is dangerous, and it cost a life in Maine that the gentleman wasn't even the target of the investigation. The whole thing is just it's a tragedy on several levels. When you give a police force or a law enforcement force like ICE a quota, which is what they've done, you have to arrest X number of people. For a while it was 3,500 people a day. Now I think it's something like 2,000. You're going to get tragic results like this.
Maine's Republican Senator Susan Collins is also speaking out about this, and she's telling reporters she has spoken to Homeland Security Secretary Markwayne Mullin 3 times since yesterday's shooting, and she says she encouraged him to halt those vehicle pursuits.
We still are waiting the facts of this investigation. We don't know exactly what happened, but there are sufficient critical questions to justify bringing non-emergency traffic stops to a halt.
There are political implications here, too. The shooting has become a focus of Democrats and their frantic effort to find a candidate to take on Senator Collins in November's Senate election after Graham Platner withdrew from the race last week. 6 Democrats have already thrown their hats in the ring for the nomination. At least 2 of them now calling for abolishing ICE in the wake of yesterday's shooting.
We saw ICE, murder people all across this country, and now we have in our state, enough is enough. We need to abolish ICE.
ICE in its current form has shown itself incapable of doing its job. I think we are at the point where ICE needs to be abolished.
NBC News senior Homeland Security correspondent Julia Ainsley is joining me now, along with Alex Seitwal, deputy editor of the Mid-Coast Villager in Maine. And you may remember he's also a former colleague of ours here at NBC News, so you've seen Alex before. Julia, let me begin with you. This is an important update that you have been a part of the reporting team bringing us this today, as ICE is ordering officers to stop pursuing people in vehicles. How significant is this order, and how long until it will be in place?
Kelly, it's hard to understate the shift change here, especially not only in policy, but in tone and the way that DHS is responding to this versus the way they responded to the shootings of 2 American citizens in Minneapolis, as well as even the shooting of a man in Houston who was also in a vehicle just last week. Previously, we heard about ICE saying that these were vehicle ramming incidents and that the men and women of ICE were under attack. Now they're taking a completely different position, saying that they are putting on pause much of their vehicle stops because they want to review these incidents and find out if they need to train their men and women better on how to approach people who may be in a vehicle. Not only that, but we're also hearing from DHS that the person who was stopped, Johann Sebastian Guerrero, and became the victim of this shooting was not the intended target. They intended to arrest someone who had a final order of removal from this country from an immigration judge, and that was not him. So there's a bit of a recollecting here as they try to understand what happened and if there need to be better policies or better training in place to prevent these fatal shootings, which seem to keep happening in cars, like it did with Renee Nicole Good, like it did with the man last week in Houston, and as it did just yesterday in Maine.
And we understand that ICE has increased pressure on its officers to make sort of a quota of 2,000 arrests a day. When you consider halting these vehicle pursuits, how will that affect that goal or change that goal?
It could definitely lower it. We were able to get the arrest numbers just from the last 3 days. It went from 1,100 on Saturday to 1,300, over 1,300 on Sunday to over 1,400 on Monday, the day of this fatal shooting in Maine. So certainly those numbers are not at the 2,000 number, but they're about double what they were before this quota went in at the end of June. This was to ask ICE officers around the country not to move where they were and surge into any one city, but to boost arrest numbers really by any means possible. They didn't need to target only those with criminal records, but they needed to go out and get the numbers as high as they could. And people I've spoken to, even people who have been big supporters of Trump's policies and have worked for ICE and DHS under this administration, say the quota, the stress that these men and women are under, are what have led to these fatal shootings. An understanding here that people aren't getting enough days off. They're not getting the time off they requested. They're often working 7 days a week. And in many cases, they're new. Remember, ICE got money, became the richest law enforcement agency in the country with the passage of that budget reconciliation, the big, beautiful bill. And they were able to hire 10,000 people in a very short period of time. And they shortened the training for that. So there's a lot of pressure on this agency now. And people I'm speaking to now say that pressure has resulted in these deaths.
That's a lot of context there that really does help us to understand the picture, the pressure on the officers and what's happening in communities. I understand that the Department of Homeland Security's Inspector General is now investigating. Is that unusual in your experience for the IG to lead an investigation like this?
They're usually the first ones to take up the helm, Kelly. The FBI is assisting, as they do, as you know, whenever there's an officer-involved shooting involving a federal agent, as there was in this case. So FBI was on the scene early yesterday, and they'll be assisting the DHS Inspector General. Whether or not it rises to a criminal level would determine whether or not the IG would then refer charges back to the Justice Department to take this any further. I will note one important exception, and that was after the death of Alex Pretty, when Kristi Noem came out very quickly to say that FBI would be handling the investigation because of the fact that she had quickly said that Alex Pretty had drawn his weapon, when in fact that turned out not to be the case. And there was a sense that DHS was not equipped to handle that investigation in an independent way.
When you raise Secretary Noem, that reminds me that we have not really seen Secretary Mark Wayne Mullen, who succeeded her in this role, yet publicly. Have you seen any information where he has commented or been seen dealing with this issue?
Only what you just played, Kelly, from the two senators from Maine talking about how they've had frequent conversations with the Homeland Security Secretary over the past 24, 36 hours since this incident. But no, we have not seen any statements that are attributed to Mark Wayne Mullen. We have only had one statement from a DHS spokesperson on the record. And other than that, we really just haven't heard as much. Remember, Mark Wayne Mullen was put into this job really to be very different from Kristi Noem. This was at a time where President Trump wanted ICE and his Homeland Security Secretary not to be making the headlines that Kristi Noem became so well known for. And so Mark Wayne Mullen has taken a softer approach. But don't fool yourself, or anyone should fool themselves into thinking that Mark Wayne Mullen isn't part of the ramped up pressure on ICE. It's coming from him. It's coming from Stephen Miller at the White House. It's also coming from the acting director of ICE, telling people to go out and make more arrests. They might not want more headlines. They, of course, didn't want these to happen, but they do want more arrest numbers.
Really great reporting. Thank you, Julia. We appreciate it. I'm going to turn now to Alex. And there is the political fallout of all of this. To what degree is the Senate race in Maine now focusing on this issue and maybe turning away from the Graham Platner controversy?
Yeah, Kelly, this became an immediate galvanizing moment for this sprint to pick a new nominee. We have less than 2 weeks until the July 25th convention where that will happen, ahead of a July 27th deadline under state law. All the leading candidates have been down to Biddeford or to an ICE facility in Scarborough. They've joined protest lines. They've called for abolishing ICE. They've worn T-shirts supporting immigrant groups. And, you know, if you think about how this race will work, this is going to be an election among 600 delegates to the state convention elected this weekend at county conventions by the most active, plugged in, diehard Democrats. So I think this is a place where the people who are going to be selecting the new Democratic nominee are really looking for somebody to be bold, to be aggressive, to be active in combating this and taking the fight to Trump and to ICE. And I think this is the last thing that Susan Collins wants right now, and that's why she's been so active on this. In my neck of the woods in Mid-Coast Maine, there's a town called Friendship that's one of the only red towns on the entire coast of Maine. The owner of the only store there was recently arrested by ICE, and there was an outpouring of support in this conservative town to release him from custody. So this is not something that Susan Collins wants to talk about. And meanwhile, it is an issue that can unite Democrats as they try to put Graham Platner behind them.
Might there be some room, as a Republican who's been elected time and time again in Maine, for her to focus on any opponent who would say abolishing ICE, as opposed to something like reform, oversight, that kind of thing? Or is that just too narrow a difference right now?
I suspect we'll get there, and certainly the outside groups, which have already been on air spending tens of millions of dollars, and it's expected that this race will top $400 million in total spending by the end of it. I'm sure they will go there, and of course, statements made now in the heat of a flash Democratic primary could be used against any Democratic candidates in November. But for now, these candidates have to respond to their immediate political pressure. And in the June 9th primary, independents were allowed to vote. Unenrolled voters were allowed to vote. This process ongoing right now is only open to registered Democrats. So the people that they are trying to win over right now are those 600 people who are going to be in the room on Bangor, less than 2 weeks from now. And that's where all the focus is. And we have a debate coming up on Thursday with News Center Maine, the NBC affiliate in Portland, that will also, I'm sure this is going to be the lead topic and a major topic of discussion there.
You are in the thick of it, Alex, with a real sprint toward this next time voters have their say. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Thanks, Kelly.
And joining me now is Dan Kleban, and he is the co-founder of the Maine Beer Company and one of at least 6 Democrats now seeking the state's Democratic state nomination for the Senate. Welcome to our program. Good to have you with us. Looks like you're in the office there with maybe some of your product behind you. How'd
you guess there?
Yes, well, sell what you have, right? There are a couple of others in this race who I know you are learning their positions and certainly in this with them. Troy Jackson, Nirav Shah, they are calling for ICE to be abolished. Having a chance to address you now, where do you stand on that issue?
Yeah, I mean, at first, I was at the vigil last night in Biddeford. It was a tremendous turnout, very somber mood. And my heart just goes out to the family of Joan Sebastian Guerrero, who was a father, a 3-year-old, and who witnessed him be shot down and killed. I can't imagine, as a father of twin 15-year-olds, I can't imagine what that is like for those kids. I think that ICE at this point has been so thoroughly corrupted by the Trump administration that it needs to be dismantled. We need immigration enforcement. There's no doubt about that. But we need an agency that is acting humanely and that is acting like every other law enforcement agency in this country. They're supposed to be there to protect people. Instead, what ICE is doing is coming into our communities and sowing fear amongst our families, and not just the immigrant community, but people who aren't immigrants, amongst our small business community. My favorite bakery in Portland is owned by an immigrant. And I remember last winter her saying that she employs lawfully immigrants, her saying that she didn't want her employees coming to work because she feared for their safety. This is not the way you go about immigration enforcement. And so I think it needs to be dismantled. And look, this falls squarely, on the front doorstep of Susan Collins. She's the chairwoman of the Appropriations Committee, and she keeps appropriating money to ICE without any sort of conditions put upon them. She just did it again last spring.
Dan, let me drill down for a moment.
Sure.
When you say dismantling, is that abolishing, or is there some wiggle room there in your eyes about what ICE could or should be?
No, when I say dismantle, I think that they have been so thoroughly corrupted, ICE needs to go away. We need to rebuild a new Customs and Border Patrol, ICE, a new enforcement agency, again, that with a new culture to act humanely, that isn't disruptive to communities. Certainly, we definitely want a strong border. And anybody who is here unlawfully and who is committing violent activities, they need to go. But ICE, as currently constituted, is just, I think, rotten to the core and needs to go.
That's interesting. Okay, so I also understand that there is a debate in this race. What is your understanding of your ability to participate, and how important would that event be?
Yeah, I mean, look, I am not a career politician. I am the outsider in this race, much like Graham Platner was. And to date, I think the Maine Democratic Party has been committed to an open and fair process, and they've done a phenomenal job under the most difficult of circumstances in living up to that. I have heard that there is going to be a debate that is not going to allow all participants to participate, including myself. I think the fact that I didn't run for another race in this cycle shouldn't disqualify me or anybody else from participating in this Senate primary debate. So I hope that the Maine Democratic Party lives up to their commitment to an open and honest process. And I hope that the news station invites everybody. I applaud Troy Jackson for calling for everybody to be able to participate. And I hope that the other candidates do the same.
So some concerns about the debate process, but also the nominating process. This is a sprint. How do you feel about how the party is handling it, and do you think it serves the voters best?
And like I said at the top of that other answer, I do think that to date, under the circumstances that were thrust upon the party did not choose this. I think they've done as good a job as you can do in trying to provide an open, fair process. Obviously, it is unorthodox. It's going to be a challenge for all of the candidates. But I think their heart was in the right place, and I think to date that they have done a good job. And I think they need to carry that same sort of commitment over to this debate process. People are sick of a rigged system, and this kind of smells like that. People are sick of that. And at the end of the day, whoever emerges from this mini sprint primary, they need to be seen as legitimate. And I think this kind of debate process is not going to lend itself to that.
And let's just explain to our viewers that you ran for the nomination last September and then dropped out of the race in April, citing a lack of financial resources. That hits lots of campaigns. Why do you think you can win the nomination now with this crowded field and this shortened process?
Actually, I just quick point of correction. I actually dropped out last fall, and it wasn't because of financial restraints. I did it actually for the best interests of the party. Graham Platner had gotten into the race. I got into the race, and then our governor, Janet Mills, got into the race. And my interest has always been to beat Susan Collins. And a crowded, bloody primary was, I think, not going to yield the strongest nominee. So I voluntarily stepped aside to let the voters decide between Graham Platner and the governor. Obviously,
you
we're
might
in a
have
different
crowded and bloody
now.
right now, though, too. 6 of you vying for this. So.
It is, but I will just remind folks this is the race that I actually chose to run in. I didn't choose to run in other races, and I'm now hopping in a different race. My goal from talking to my wife and my family a year ago has to beat Susan Collins.
Do you think that now that Platner is out and this is a short time frame, just want to ask for the benefit of voters in Maine, is there anything in your background that would come out in vetting that voters should consider?
No, I actually had a full vetting done on me prior to getting in this race because I realized that the stakes are so high. We can't, unfortunately, we lived through it. But I did not want to get into a race against Susan Collins and have it be jeopardized by some skeleton or some sort of October surprise. So I have been fully vetted. I've been happily married for 22 years, twin 15-year-olds. I started a small business here. I've been doing that for the last 2 decades, served on numerous community boards and trade association boards. People know Dan Kleban. And so I can promise you, other than being happily married with kids and a successful small business, there's nothing in my background that I'm concerned about. I would never expose my family to this kind of brutal process if there was.
Politics is tough. It is tough. Dan, we appreciate your time today. It is full contact, and thank you for sharing your views and giving voters not only in Maine but around the country a sense of where you stand in what is one of the most talked about races. We really appreciate your time today. Thank you so much.
Yeah, and if people are interested more about the campaign, danformaine.com.
You made the most of that. And coming up, we're going to turn our attention now to the president changing course on his plan to charge countries for passage through the Strait of Hormuz. We'll have more on what's happening in Iran today when we come back. Welcome back. We're turning now to the war in Iran, where last hour the Pentagon said it began launching yet another new wave of strikes on Iran, making this the 4th consecutive day of attacks. As of 4 p.m. Eastern, the administration is also now reimposing its naval blockade in the Strait of Hormuz. This comes as the Trump administration looks to degrade Iran's ability to attack commercial shipping in the Strait of Hormuz. After last night's strikes by the U.S., Iran struck back with attacks of its own. Iran's state media releasing this video that it says shows missiles being launched against U.S. targets. Now, we should note NBC News cannot determine when or where that video was shot. Both the U.S. and Iran are trying to assert control over the Strait of Hormuz. Iran's army spokesperson saying that critical waterway will never be reopened through war or aggression by the U.S. President Trump, meanwhile, saying that the U.S. maintains control of the strait. But this morning, he retreated from his plan to place a toll on ships passing through it. The president was asked about that decision as he hosted the Iraqi prime minister in the Oval Office today.
I was called by different people, different countries, kings and emirs and all of the people that we all know and we all love. And they've been very strong partners. And they said, we'd love to do it a different way. We'd love to invest in the United States with billions and billions of dollars and continue our record setting, because there's never been a time like this for the United States, with the factories, with the plants, with everything else. And we would like to invest tremendously in the United States as opposed to charging a fee. The Gulf states are going to invest a tremendous amount of money into the United States, and that was very satisfactory to me. I think it's actually much better.
He didn't reference the fact that it is illegal in international law to charge a fee in an international waterway. The latest tensions over the Strait of Hormuz is also causing oil prices to rise once again to their highest level since mid-June. The president choosing to tout new economic data showing inflation eased in the month of May. But that was before oil prices began to tick up again. And here's more from the president on that issue.
The report was incredible. Inflation is way down. That means prices are coming way down, and we're doing a great job. Remember that for the midterms. I say to that camera, remember that, because nobody else could do it. Prices are way down. Prices are coming way down, and we're going to bring them much lower yet.
We should note that the government's data show that overall prices for consumers are not going down in any meaningful way, and prices remain significantly higher than policymakers would prefer. And joining me now, NBC News Chief International Correspondent Keir Simmons and NBC News Business and Data Correspondent Brian Chung. And we're glad to have both of you gentlemen with us today to talk about this from two different perspectives. Keir, you've been in the region. You have a sense of what the mood is like as the U.S. is launching the latest round of strikes. Give us a sense of where you think things stand right now.
Well, Kelly, more strikes tonight, as you say, by the U.S. Against Iran, and also by Iran against its Gulf neighbors here. So the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, Iran's military corps, saying that it has launched strikes against Bahrain, which isn't far from here. Bahrain not confirming that, but Qatar, where I am, condemning those kinds of strikes by Iran on Bahrain, on Kuwait, on Jordan. And then tonight, Kuwait's Ministry of Defense spokesperson saying 1 ballistic missile, 5 cruise missiles and 33 drones have been intercepted just this Tuesday evening. And you're seeing some pictures there, even as we hear of more explosions inside Iran. So a fourth night now of this assault on Iran by U.S. Central Command. We got through to an Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps former commander, IRGC former commander, inside Tehran just before all this latest night of strikes began. And I wanted to ask him just about where we stand and what we should expect. Take a listen. You're saying Iran, the IRGC, is ready to shoot back, to fire back, and is capable of it?
Yes, I think everything is ready to answer. Everything is ready to attack, not just only in this area, in this region. I think expansion of the operation in the other places.
Can they get back to negotiations?
I don't think so.
Yeah, Kelly, he was scathing about the potential for getting that memorandum of understanding between Iran and the US back on track, remembering that that was signed just weeks ago.
And it's rare to hear from someone in that role as an IRGC commander, so that was significant. And are you getting a sense, we've seen the president now changing tactics, saying that demand for a toll, that's off the shelf. He wants to have investments from nations in the region. How's that playing there?
Well, I guess there will be some relief. I mean, certainly it was clearly an intervention from the leaders of countries like Qatar here. We don't know exactly which leaders, but you can guess, frankly, the UAE, Saudi Arabia, all of them will hate the idea of a 20% toll on shipping through the Strait of Hormuz, which is, you could take a ship from here to the Strait of Hormuz if you were brave enough at this point. Few are. They don't like it. And in fact, the front page of the UAE newspaper, main UAE newspaper, talking about the tens of millions of dollars per ship it would cost to pay that. So they'll be glad that that's gone. But frankly, it's a small thing, considering that just as we speak, Kelly, that naval blockade by the US is back on now here in this region. And it's not clear when it will be reopened.
Keir, thank you for those updates, really up to the minute on the conditions there. We appreciate it. I'm going to turn now to Brian. And all of this is happening as we're getting some new economic data, and that takes us through some of the latest inflation news. Brian, tell us, where are these new data points and what does it say about the state of the economy right now?
Yeah, the inflation as far as prices are concerned, not as bad as it was. And that was because the data that we were looking at reflected the MOU of understanding that we got in the middle of June with regards to the conflict between the U.S. and Iran. 3.5%. That's how much prices rose in June of this year compared to June of last year. That was an improvement from the 4.2% we saw in the May to May period. And if you zoom out, you can see on this chart ahead of you, that is kind of reversing some of the unwelcome increase in inflation that we had seen since this war began in late February. It's also a pretty good improvement, as you can see, from that peak inflation we saw in 2022, where that rate of increase was somewhere closer to 9%. Now, in terms of where we have seen the changes in prices, food costs continuing to go up, shelter costs are continuing to go up. It's an important point you bring up that prices are not going down on the whole. It's still a positive number. But where we are seeing prices come down is in energy costs, where prices were down by 6% over the 1 month period. Actually, what we're talking about here are changes just between May and June. That is because on an average basis, gas prices at the pump on a national average were coming down from like $4.50 in May to somewhere closer to just below $4 by the end of June. So that reflects this report. But again, what this does not reflect is the changes that we've seen as over the last few weeks where prices have been nudging back up, Kelly.
That's exactly right. So the White House touting some of the information you just outlined. But because we've seen oil prices going back, how might that affect these numbers going forward in real terms for consumers?
Yeah, well, and again, what we've seen is anytime there's any threat to the Strait of Hormuz, you see oil prices spike in the markets, and that means higher prices for us at the pump. So crude oil has already been going up. Currently, the average on Brent oil is almost $80. Rather, on WTI oil is almost $80. For international Brent oil, it's somewhere closer to $85. And again, what we were talking about in those inflation numbers, which seem pretty positive, was only this period of time. So in the next report, we're going to see the impact of that increase. And it's a good reason to think that this could go even higher because, again, we have already seen further escalation in the Strait of Hormuz. Gas prices right now, $3.85. Analysts saying the next stop on an average could be $4 a gallon, Kelly.
Thank you for walking us through all of that, Brian. Good to see you. And up next, the younger sister of the late Senator Lindsey Graham is officially sworn in to serve out the remainder of his term. We'll bring you that unusual and special moment. Stay with us on Meet the Press Now. Welcome back. Democrats are renewing their calls for reforms to ICE in the wake of two deadly shootings in Maine and Texas. Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer calling on the administration this afternoon to publicly release all information related to the shootings, as well as calling for independent investigations into both incidents. Joining me now, we're pleased to have Congresswoman Mejia of New Jersey. She's a vocal advocate for immigration reform, including abolishing ICE. Thank you for coming to be with us today.
Thank you.
Now, the administration says it will stop pursuing vehicles as a part of the sort of practice of ICE officers right now. Is that enough? And do you think it will be in any way able to calm things down?
Well, I think first and foremost, thank you for having me on. I would say that it is clear that this requires a multi-pronged approach to ensure that the American people are kept safe. The bottom line is that ICE agents are woefully underprepared and undertrained. It's clear they are increasing the encounters or violent encounters instead of de-escalating. It is clear that we have a recruitment problem, a training problem, an accountability problem. And
is there a quota problem if there is, in fact, a target for the number of apprehensions or arrests on a daily basis or weekly basis? Do you have an issue with that?
Well, I have an issue with the idea that we have rogue agents that are trigger happy and they're stopping people who aren't even the targets of the enforcement operation. How frightening is it to think that our own government is running around buckshot in our communities without actually having the correct information, the correct target, the correct training, and then in the end, it's resulting in death and murder.
Just to clarify for our audience your position, if someone is here illegally, if they've had a deportation order, do you believe it's appropriate for ICE to remove them?
More than anything, I believe in the Constitution and the fact that every single person in these United States has a right to due process and equal protection. So I would like to see our government actually adhering to the Constitution. I believe that we need to abolish and replace ICE. Of course, we need to have a system, an immigration system, so that we have the safety and integrity of our nation at the forefront. But the bottom line is these practices are putting every American at risk.
You've seen that there are Republicans who are running in swing districts who are using this idea of abolishing ICE or dramatically changing its purpose as a way to appeal to their voters. How do you think this will affect the midterms if if Democrats are seen as so out of step with what others might say is a mainstream position?
Well, actually, what I'm seeing is the American voter expressing very clearly that they do not want to see chaos in our streets. I got elected right after the incidents in Minnesota, where it was clear that the American people, whether you're a citizen or undocumented, you are at risk when you have rogue agents running around our cities, trigger happy, shooting people without actually ascertaining if they have the correct target. Furthermore, this, violating our immigration laws or immigration systems should not be a death sentence or should not result in a death sentence. And again, this is putting the American people also in danger.
And do you see this step of pulling back on the vehicle pursuits as a positive?
Well, I think that what we require is de-escalation training. You ask any police officer, any law enforcement agent, and they'll tell you, you do not put your body in front of a vehicle. You have to have certain criteria, training and de-escalation criteria met. And it is clear that our ICE agents do not have it, and it's putting everyone, including those agents, at risk.
Another issue that is really animating, especially the progressive part of the Democratic Party, is the issue of Israel and how the U.S. is going to interact with Israel. Hakeem Jeffries says he plans to oppose a measure to cut U.S. aid to Israel. And where do you stand on that amendment?
The bottom line for me is that the U.S. taxpayers, they desire to have their tax dollars go towards our morals and values. We uphold human rights. We believe in following the rule of law, international law. And so for me, I think that until we can have a commitment of upholding the fullness of human rights for every individual, whether it's individuals in Israel, Gaza, West Bank, then the United States should essentially utilize their resources and funding.
Hold back the money.
Hold back the money to ensure that we are uplifting and supporting human rights.
When you first came to Congress,
the world calls on that.
When you first came to Congress, you did not support, you were non-committal in whether Hakeem Jeffries should be the leader of Democrats in the House. Where are you now? And
there's nothing off the table or on the table. For me, bottom line is that we have to show the American people that we mean business. We have had a president who is clearly moving a Democratic backslide. I think the recent action around the Electoral Assistance Commission shows that this president is trying to grab all the levers of power. I think that the American people, we are clear that we have an affordability crisis, and what they want are their representatives to take concrete action. And what I'm looking for is leadership that will do exactly that.
Is it risky in this political environment to support the current leader of your own party?
I think it's risky in this moment to not listen to the American people. I think it's risky in this moment to not tackle affordability. I think it's risky in this moment to pretend like we are not in the grips of, again, a Democratic backslide that is led by our own president. And I think the Democrats and newly elected members like myself are speaking loud and clear on behalf of the American people who want to see real concrete change and not just a return to the status quo.
Do you believe that the Democratic Party is changing in real time? Is the support for progressive candidates in various races where we've seen pronounced progressive candidates, is this changing, or is this just a moment within the midterms because some of the most active and passionate voters are the most engaged in the primary phase?
I think that Donald Trump and the MAGA movement for the last 10 years have shifted us all the way to the right in a way that has reset the center. And I think American voters are responding with a desire to have bolder policies. And so what may look like far left is actually a return to what would have been common sense ideas a few years ago. The idea that we should take out the profit model out of our healthcare system, the idea that we all should be equal before the laws, the idea that we should not have members of Congress that are enriching themselves, or the president enriching themselves instead of in their moment of public service.
What do you think is the impact of some of these divisions or debate within the party about where they want to be on the spectrum? There are some, as critics would call them, sort of left-wing bomb throwers that are making a lot of noise, getting a lot of attention. And there is this opportunity, given where the president is, the normal traditional swing back in a midterm election. Do you think some of this trying to identify where the party's heart is that harmful to accomplishing a win for the party in November, or is it part of a redefining of the Democratic Party at this moment?
I think what's happening in the Democratic Party is proving that we are vibrant and alive, that our voters are paying attention, that they have ideas, and they're making demands. I think what you're seeing in the Republican Party is a bunch of scared individuals that are falling lockstep with the president, that is willing to threaten them and use force, political force against his own party. I think the Democrats, however, are in tune with the American people. We have vibrancy. We have new ideas.
Even to independence when November comes around?
I think that in this moment, what we need to do is listen to the American people. And I will tell you, in the suburbs of New Jersey, what I heard is that people want concrete action that will bring down the cost of living, that they want more money in their pockets, that they want to make sure that our laws are actually equally applied, and that there's tax fairness so that billionaires pay their fair share and that middle-class families have a shot in thriving, not just surviving.
Congresswoman Mejia, we appreciate you coming into studio and spending time with us and talking about these important issues. Thank you so much. We really do appreciate it. Thank you for your time today. And as of this afternoon, there is a new senator from South Carolina. Darlene Graham was just sworn in to serve out the remainder of her late brother Lindsey Graham's term. The first time a sibling has ever been appointed to succeed a senator. She's also the first female senator from South Carolina. While her legal name is Darlene Graham Nordone, a spokesperson says she will go by Senator Graham. Meanwhile, a bipartisan group of senators today unveiled a Russian sanctions bill originally led by Senator Lindsey Graham. That bill imposes mandatory sanctions on Putin as well as Russian financial institutions and state energy projects.
I'm going to begin by channeling my Lindsey Graham to say this is a big effing deal. Sanctions will be a decisive factor in this war. Throttling Putin's economy, stopping the flow of oil and gas revenue. It's a complex and long bill, but it is truly a tribute to Senator Graham that we are at this point.
President Trump today said he would decide very soon whether he'd be willing to sign that bill. And still to come, primetime preview with the midterms fast approaching. President Trump is keeping his focus on elections in America and false claims of fraud as he hypes a primetime address on the issue later this week. Keep it here on Meet the Press Now. Welcome back. We're turning now to President Trump's Thursday night address, which he announced yesterday, calling it a speech to the nation, but including no details about the topic. And when he was asked about this address at the Oval Office today, the president confirmed that it would be tied to the issue of elections in the United States.
I'd rather save it, but it's really big news. It's really, really big news. And our country has to shape up. But that's what we're going to be talking about Thursday is it doesn't get bigger, because without free and fair elections, you don't have a country. We'll be discussing other things too, but it's going to be a very big announcement. Yeah.
A source familiar with the subject tells NBC News that the primetime remarks will focus in part on election integrity and some of the Trump administration's findings around the 2020 election. The address comes amid the president's renewed efforts to exert influence over elections across the country ahead of November's midterms, and as he pushes conspiracy theories and false claims about election fraud in races that he or other Republicans lost. And now joining us is our panel. Our senior national politics reporter John Allen is here. We're also joined by Molly Ball, a veteran political reporter, Arshie Siddiqui, Democratic strategist and founder and CEO of Bellwether government affairs and former Republican Congressman Carlos Curbelo. He is also an NBC News contributor. So welcome, one and all. There's nothing I enjoy more as a political reporter than a primetime address. But this one is a little different, right? It's so urgent, and yet we're going to wait a few days for this address, and we're not sure exactly what it's all about. So let's get into this. I'd love to get a sense. John, let me start with you. What do you think the president's message is? What is his real aim here? And is there anything new in what he has to say?
I will be 1,000% shocked if he doesn't say that elections in the United States are rigged, not free, and not fair. And I say that because every time he's had an opportunity to talk about elections, even the ones he's won, he has said that they have been rigged by the other side in some way or another. I do not know what he will say. I am always open to the possibility that he will say something different. But it's been 10 years. And I think we know what to expect from the president. There may be different information that he tries to put out there about election rigging or perceived election rigging. But I think that's what we're going to hear.
And Molly, I made a reference to the fact if it's so urgent, why wait till Thursday? Do you have a sense of what the president's timing is here? And is there new information that perhaps his team has put together? Is there something that causes them to wait for Thursday?
That's really not clear at this point. We really don't know what the occasion is for this speech. But, you know, as you heard from the president in that clip, he is saying that there is going to be new information, that there's going to be a big announcement, some kind of big news. I mean, a few things that we know he's fixated on, the SAVE Act that he's repeatedly pushed the Senate to abolish the filibuster to pass. He continues to be obsessed with that as recently as last week.
And there's no movement there.
Refusing to sign the housing bill because the Senate hasn't moved on that matter and is not likely to because, as you well know, the votes are not there, but he continues to be obsessed with this. He had an executive order on elections trying to change the rules on a variety of things, including mail ballots, that the courts struck down in the past few weeks. And so I would expect all of these things to be in the mix of his, as Jonathan said, regular election obsession.
One thing that's different is that Bill Pulte's been in the role of acting director of national intelligence for a period of weeks now. Should that give us a sense of maybe there's been some work in that area to try to find out information that relates to how elections function?
Such a great question, Kelly. Again, don't know exactly what he's going to say, but I do think that you make a good point. You now have somebody new in that role who will be looking at all of the intelligence collected by the intelligence community over the course of certainly the last couple of years and even before that. And so there's always the possibility that they will present information that we've known for a long time that is not actually new, but is new to them. And we see that anywhere in a workplace. That often happens.
Sure.
Somebody comes in, they go, "Oh my God, did you know this was going on?" And people go, "Yeah, we knew that was going on. It's not what you think it is." So we'll have to see tomorrow, but certainly a possibility. And Pulte definitely loves to tell the president what the president likes to hear.
Let me turn to you, Congressman. The idea that the president wants to do this now when we're in the midterms, is it about the midterms, even if it's including a look back at elections that have already been decided and in some ways adjudicated?
Kelly, this is about, as Jonathan said, an obsession that the president has had almost from day one. By the way, a president who won a very close election in 2016 and won again in 2024. This is extremely frustrating for congressional Republicans who are running for re-election in a very tough environment. Election integrity is not top of mind for most voters. It especially isn't top of mind for swing voters, the ones that will decide who gets reelected and who doesn't. So while a lot of House Republicans and some Senate Republicans are a little hopeful, there's been that Maine controversy that's hurt Democrats. The housing bill passed without the president's signature. So you could see a narrative that they could run on and perhaps, defy history here and not get routed. But with this focus on election integrity, it really does throw them off message. And, the president, if he really wants elections to go his way, should focus on helping these House and Senate Republicans.
Archie, how should Democrats use this information? Is this something that runs the risk of inflaming some ideas that have been really widely viewed or debunked as false narratives about elections in the past? Or does it open some doors of worry in voters today? Is there a way that Democrats can use this or just ignore it?
Well, the fact of the matter is that this has been a running pattern by the president, right? The midterms are, the shadow is casting in a very significant way. Just last year, there was the landmark economic bill that the president passed. He immediately turned to mid-cycle redistricting. And that now has resulted in 10 extra seats for Republicans where they have a much better shot. So you then move to the SAVE Act, which now is in play for the newest reconciliation bill in Congress. And that, again, is about who votes, how they vote, where they vote. And so whether it's, IDs for voting, absolutely. But that usually is a state designation. Now we're talking about birth certificates or passports. Whereas as we know, about 50% of Americans don't have passports.
And many of them live in red states that overwhelmingly voted for the president, but they don't have that documentation handy, perhaps.
Absolutely.
Can I raise my hand and just say these regulations would make it a lot harder for women who've had name changes because they got married?
Yes, because the birth certificate was in their maiden name. Right. Absolutely.
Which affects a broad swath of the American public.
John, let me turn to you now on the issue of Iran. In part of our program, we talked about the president pulling back from the toll idea, now talking about investment, reinstating the blockade. Is the president, do you get a sense that there was pressure from other nations behind that decision to pull back?
I very much get the sense of that when you heard the president talk about it. He talked about the Gulf nations' investment in the United States. I think about that new Air Force One, that $300 million plane from Qatar that the president is not actually using all the time right now. Absolutely. Those Gulf states do not want to see fees charged for transiting the Strait of Hormuz because that will increase the cost of their oil as it goes out. And so, I think that's absolutely what the president was alluding to, that the Gulf states are pushing back on him. And they also don't want Iran to be able to make the argument that that shipping should be taxed, which is basically what Iran is doing. So if the president wants a moral high ground on that with Iran, it is very difficult for him to say, we're going to toll it, but you shouldn't be able to.
That could give the Iranians a future plan for someday when the U.S. is out of there. How do you see the issue of oil creeping back up in price? We imagine it will with the blockade back in force, and how that casts a shadow on the midterms.
It's just a source of it's a continuing political problem for the president and his party. The fact that gas prices are so high, the fact that the president has repeatedly announced resolutions to this conflict that didn't turn out to be real, I think there's a sense of frustration on the part of voters, especially considering that even before he made the choice to undertake this conflict, affordability was already the #1 issue. The people's ability to pay for the things that they need in life was already the #1 thing on most voters' minds, especially, to Carlos's point, those swing voters who might be deciding whether or not they still like this president that maybe they voted for last time around as they go to the polls in the midterms. So, so many Republicans in Congress have been crossing their fingers hoping that the president will be successful in bringing an end to this conflict so those prices will go back down, but we don't see that happening anytime soon.
And just the wear and tear on voters who are not invested in this conflict with Iran, based on what polling tells us. Do you get a sense that there is an opportunity here for the president to try to do anything else, or is this a case where it's baked in now that gas prices are higher and that this is a conflict that will last for some time?
Probably the best thing they can do is try to get a couple more legislative wins out of the Congress, maybe a transportation bill, permitting reform, something that the president and Republicans can then turn to the public and say, hey, we know times are a little tough, but here are some things we're doing, working with the other side to try to make things better.
And I have to leave it there. Thank you all for your insights, and we really appreciate it. And we'll be back here tomorrow for more of Meet the Press Now, and the news continues here.
We thank you for watching, and remember, stay updated on breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or watch live on our YouTube channel.